Devorah's influence in Vitebsk. As we have already been told, Devorah's main activities were centered among the Jewish women of Vitebsk. She appealed in the first instance to their kind and womanly hearts to help her with her various deeds of charity. They were very ready and willing to help her in establishing charitable organizations and institutions. This gave Devorah her further opportunity to influence them also in other directions. All the women accepted her as their leader and guide, recognizing her superior qualities and abilities. Thus it was that when they gathered at their meetings, Devorah grasped the opportunity to talk to them also on religious matters. She told them stories from the Medrash, sayings of our sages, dinim of special interest and significance to women, and they listened very readily and thirstily. For Devorah had a wonderful power of oratory, and it was a sheer delight to listen to her. She spoke to them simply, and everyone understood her without difficulty. At that time, the Taich Chumash had already been printed, especially for women, and Devorah read it to them and encouraged them to read it for themselves. But Devorah was not satisfied to concentrate on one section only of the Jewish community. Her ambition was to see Vitebsk as a whole becoming a center of Jewish learning. And why not? It need only be a question of time if a beginning was made before Vitebsk would become as literary as Minsk or any other famous Jewish city. Since Devorah's childhood, she remembered having yeshiva students come to their house to eat teg, and later she continued this practice in her own home. But here in Vitebsk, where there was but a small yeshiva, more or less for local students, it had not been found necessary to introduce such a practice, and even had the necessity arisen, the people of Vitebsk were not used to such an arrangement. Devorah decided it would do the Jews of Vitebsk good to practice such an innovation, for it taught people the virtue of hospitality. So she had a talk with her husband to see what would be their best plan of action in this regard. Believing that charity should begin at home and that it was up to them to set an example, she suggested to her husband that he choose 5 or 6 boys from the local yeshiva and send them to one of the famous yeshivas in Krakow or Prague. They would remain there at his expense until their education was of sufficiently high level to enable them to return to Vitebsk and give the Vitebsk students the benefit of their higher education and learning. They would be the pioneers of a generation of Torah scholars. As this would obviously take some years, Devorah proposed that Nachum should appoint someone to visit the great and well-known yeshivas at Minsk, Slutsk, Brisk, and Vilna, and there choose suitable teachers who would be willing to come with their wives and families to settle in Vitebsk on a condition that they agreed to live and teach in the districts allotted to them. The purpose, of course, was that the whole area be covered with teachers in all districts and the religious education of the whole community cared for. Nachum readily agreed and appointed Rabbi Moshe, the son of his former teacher, the saintly Gaon Yekutiel Zalman of Krakow, as the most suitable person to choose the teachers required. Nachum made it clear to Rabbi Moshe that he was undertaking the cost of all expenses, including the maintenance of the teachers and their families while they were in Vitebsk. He stipulated, however, that they must not know that Nachum was paying them their salaries. He preferred to remain their anonymous benefactor. However, continued Nachum, should there be people in Vitebsk who would like to contribute toward the educational expenses, the money could be accepted and turned over to charity. He wished quite definitely that he himself bear all the costs of the proposed scheme. The plan took much time and thought, as was expected, and it was some 9 months later that Rabbi Moshe completed his mission and returned to Vitebsk with 10 teachers who conformed to the requirements demanded by Nachum and Devorah. The coming of these teachers eventually attracted other scholars to Vitebsk, among them a certain Rabbi Ephraim Simcha. Before very long, the sweet sound of Torah could be heard throughout the whole town of Vitebsk. Shiurim were arranged to enable all who wished to attend to do so, without having to go very far. The times, too, were fixed conveniently. With everything done to encourage them, the Jews of Vitebsk began first to trickle into the shiurim, and then gradually The trickle became a constant stream as the students became more and more interested. Very soon it became a matter of course for people of all ages, both young and old, to flock to hear a word of Torah. Devorah's dream of making Vitebsk a center for Torah was gradually becoming a beautiful reality. Naturally, all this involved much more than can be related here. It was now 10 years since Devorah had first spoken to her husband about this plan, and the change in Vitebsk was very marked. Although Nachum had been very reluctant to change his ways, he too had been influenced by his purposeful wife. Little by little, he had emerged from his isolation and shown an interest in the life around him. It was the teachers who had come from the various yeshivas who had first called forth his interest. He began to meet them and discuss Torah topics with them. This seemed to remove, to some extent, his spell of reserve. Occasionally, he even inquired about matters concerning his business. Devorah was delighted to welcome these scholars to her home and to see how Nachum enjoyed their company and the Torah people which they indulged. These were indeed happy years for Nachum and Devorah, but their happiness was marred by the absence of children. If only they could have had a son to carry on their name, how content they would have felt. They were getting on in their years and their hopes were diminishing. In the midst of this state of affairs, they had a very special visitor. No less a personality than the famous scholar, saint, and Kabbalist, Rabbi Moshe Gershon, a disciple of the Gaon, Rabbi Eliyahu, who was known at the time as the Baal Shem of Worms. For many years, Rabbi Moshe Gershon had studied under the well-known Rabbi Pinchas in Fulda, Germany. Nachum was really thrilled to be host to such a distinguished guest and sought every opportunity of talking to him on Torah matters. They found much to discuss, and Nachum felt so drawn to him that he found he could talk to him on every subject without reservation. Thus it came about that he revealed to him the innermost secrets of his heart, and he told him of his previously undisclosed sorrow, the fact that he had no child. Rabbi Moshe Gershon listened to him with great sympathy, and then gently said to him, "You know, my good friend, there is no one in the world who has everything his heart desires. There are three blessings that man looks for in life. There is the blessing of having children, the blessing of wealth, and the blessing of long life. The Almighty has already blessed you with wealth and long life. You cannot also expect the third blessing, children. If, however, you are convinced that your preference is to have children, you must be prepared to relinquish one of the other two blessings." Rabbi Moshe Gershon's words made a great impression on him. Shutting himself away from everybody, Nachum spent many days in silent contemplation of his problem, seeking to find the true answer. Finally, he emerged from his seclusion and sought out Rabbi Moshe Gershon, telling him he was willing and ready to give up either of the two things with which he was already blessed: wealth, his business had flourished exceedingly, or long life. He was at this time over 60 years of age.